I'm afraid this is final.
We're letting you go.
Richard, letting you go.
This is completely unacceptable.
I will not sign this.
What would you do if your toughest business decision came back to stare at you across a candlelit table beside your billionaire father? She fired a loyal single dad for asking one day off after 9 years of perfect service. 24 hours later, she walked into a glittering Manhattan restaurant and saw him dining with the one man whose approval meant everything to her. In that moment, the sound of clinking crystal felt louder than her heartbeat. Her confidence cracked, her world shifted. And one simple request for a child's school ceremony turned into a life-changing lesson about love, marriage, fatherhood, and what real success truly means. Stay with me, because this true story is not just about a shocking dinner. It is about pride, pain, redemption, and the kind of wisdom that can transform a family, a company, and maybe even your own life. Before we dive into this unforgettable true story, take a quick second to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss a single powerful, life-changing episode. This is a real story. It happened in a glass tower overlooking the restless streets of New York City. The building shimmered in the autumn sun. Inside, everything smelled of polished marble and expensive perfume. Elena Whitmore stood by the wide window of her corner office. She was 34 years old, sharp, disciplined, the newly appointed Chief Operations Officer of Whitmore Holdings. Her father, Charles Whitmore, had built the company from nothing. She had sworn she would protect his legacy with iron rules. No excuses, no weakness, no time off without proper notice. For 9 years, Daniel Reyes had followed every rule. He arrived before sunrise. He left long after the cleaning crews. He wore the same 2 suits in careful rotation. He spoke softly. Worked fiercely. He was a single father. His wife, Marisol, had passed away after a long illness. Daniel had held her hand in a small hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. After that day, he became both father and mother to their little girl, Sophia. He braided her hair in the mornings. He packed her lunches with handwritten notes. He read to her every night, even when his eyes burned with exhaustion. In 9 years, he never asked for a single day off, until that Monday. Elena remembered the knock on her office door, soft, almost apologetic. Daniel stood there, shoulders tense, eyes shadowed. He asked for one day, just one. His daughter had won a regional science competition. There would be an award ceremony. She wanted her father in the front row. Elena felt the weight of deadlines pressing against her temples. Investors were visiting. Schedules were tight. She heard her own voice turn cold. She told him that commitments to the company came first. She told him that personal matters should be managed outside critical business hours. She told him that absence would signal lack of dedication. The air in the room felt thin. Daniel nodded slowly. His jaw tightened. He said he understood. But he repeated that this was the first time in 9 years. Elena felt irritation rise like heat. Rules were rules. She terminated his employment on the spot. The click of her pen against the desk sounded louder than it should have. Daniel thanked her for the opportunity, thanked her. He walked out with a small cardboard box. The office lights seemed harsher that afternoon. Evening came with a restless wind. Elena drove home through traffic that crawled like regret. Her chest felt tight, though she told herself it was only fatigue. The next night, her father invited her to dinner, an exclusive restaurant on the 72nd floor of a private club. Crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, the scent of truffle and roasted garlic in the air. Elena stepped inside, smoothing her tailored jacket. She scanned the room, then her breath caught. At a corner table near the window, beneath a cascade of golden light, sat her father. Across from him sat Daniel Reyes. Daniel wore his old gray suit, but he looked different, calm, composed. His daughter sat beside him, smiling shyly at something Charles had just said. Elena felt heat rush to her face. Her ears rang. The clink of silverware sounded distant. Her father looked up. His gaze was steady, inviting, unforgiving. She walked toward them on trembling legs. Each step felt like crossing a fragile bridge. Charles stood to greet her. He kissed her cheek gently. Then he gestured to the empty chair. His voice was quiet. He said he had known Daniel for years, long before Elena had joined the company. He said Daniel once saved a major contract by working through 3 nights without sleep. He said Daniel had refused promotions because they required travel away from his sick wife. He said Daniel had never spoken of his struggles. He had simply worked, with loyalty, with dignity, with immeasurable devotion. Alina felt her stomach drop. The restaurant lights seemed too bright. She heard the faint hum of the city far below. Her father continued. He said that wealth meant nothing without humanity. He said leadership without compassion was emptiness dressed in silk. He said that a company is only as strong as the love and respect it shows its people. Daniel sat quietly. Sophia swung her feet under the table. She looked at Alina with open curiosity. No anger. No bitterness, only innocence. Alina felt something break inside her, not pride, not authority, but the hard shell she had built around her heart. She saw, for the first time, the cost of her rigidity. She saw a father who had carried grief like a silent backpack for years. She saw a child who had simply wanted her father in the front row. Tears blurred the sparkling skyline beyond the glass. Alina turned to Daniel. Her voice trembled. She apologized fully, without defense, without excuses. She offered him his position back. With paid leave for the ceremony, with flexible hours, with support for working parents written into company policy. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at Alina. He said he accepted, not out of need, but out of hope that kindness could grow in powerful places. Charles smiled softly. The tension at the table melted into something warmer. Dinner continued with stories, laughter, shared memories of love and loss. Sophia described her science project with animated hands and shining eyes. Alina listened, truly listened. In the weeks that followed, Whitmore Holdings changed. Family days were introduced. Parental leave expanded. Managers were trained to lead with empathy. Productivity rose, but more importantly, so did trust. Daniel attended the ceremony. He sat in the front row. When Sophia's name was called, she searched the crowd. She found him. He stood and clapped with tears in his eyes. Later that evening, he and Sophia visited Marisol's grave. They placed the medal beside fresh flowers. Daniel whispered that they were still a family, still strong, still full of love. Alina watched from a respectful distance. She understood that success without compassion is failure in disguise, and that sometimes the most shocking lesson arrives not in a boardroom, but at a dinner table, under golden light, where pride meets truth, and where love quietly rewrites the rules. And that was only the beginning of what Alina would learn about leadership, marriage, sacrifice, and the sacred responsibility of caring for those who trust you with both their labor and their hearts. Alina carried that dinner with her like a living flame. It warmed her, it humbled her, it refused to let her return to the woman she had been. At home that night, the penthouse felt too large, too quiet. Her husband, Michael, was sitting at the kitchen island. He had been reviewing architectural plans for a community housing project. He looked up as she entered. He saw the redness around her eyes. He walked toward her without a word, wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She inhaled the familiar scent of cedarwood and laundry soap. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to lean. Not as an executive, not as a daughter of a billionaire, but as a wife who needed comfort. She told him everything, every cold sentence, every rigid thought, every flash of shame at the restaurant. Michael listened. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He held her hands in both of his and said that strength without tenderness is only noise. He reminded her of their early years, when they had struggled to pay rent, when they had taken turns staying awake with their newborn son, Ethan, when love had meant sacrifice and patience and shared exhaustion. Alina closed her eyes. She remembered the weight of Ethan in her arms, the tiny fingers gripping her blouse, the quiet promise she had made to always choose family first. Somewhere along the climb to success, that promise had grown faint. The next morning, Alina arrived at the office before sunrise. The building felt different. The marble floors no longer gleamed with pride. They echoed with responsibility. She called a company-wide meeting. Employees filled the atrium. Daniel stood near the back, Sophia beside him because school had not yet begun. Alina stepped onto the small stage. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. The microphone felt cool against her fingers. She admitted her mistake, publicly, clearly. She said she had valued policy over people. She said she had forgotten that behind every employee badge beats a human heart. The room was silent, heavy. Then she announced new initiatives, flexible schedules for parents, emergency family leave without penalty, scholarship funds for employees' children, a mentorship program for widowed or single parents re-entering the workforce. She saw surprise flicker across faces, then cautious relief. Daniel stepped forward after the meeting. He thanked her. Not for the job, but for the courage to change. Sophia tugged at Alina's sleeve. She handed her a small drawing. It showed a tall building with many windows. Inside each window was a smiling stick figure. Above it she had written, "Our work family." Alina felt tears gather again, but this time they were not born from shame. They were born from awakening. Weeks turned into months. Whitmore Holdings began to feel less like a machine and more like a living community. Productivity reports showed steady growth. Employee turnover dropped. But what mattered most were the small scenes Alina began to notice. Fathers leaving early to attend school plays. Mothers working remotely while caring for sick children. Teams covering for one another without resentment. Laughter in hallways that once felt sterile. One evening, Alina visited Daniel's home, a modest brick house in Queens. The living room smelled of homemade soup and fresh bread. Family photographs lined the walls. Marisol's portrait hung above the piano. Daniel spoke about his late wife with reverence. He described her patience, her humor, her belief that love is an action repeated daily. Alina listened as Sophia practiced her presentation for a state science fair. Her voice was confident now. Full of joy, after dinner, Daniel walked Alina to her car. The air was cool. City lights shimmered in puddles from a recent rain. He told her that losing Marisol had nearly broken him. He had considered giving up on ambition, on dreams, but Sophia had looked at him one night and said she still needed her hero. So he kept working, not for recognition, but for love. Alina drove home slowly. The steering wheel felt steady beneath her palms. She realized that Daniel had taught her more about leadership than any business school ever had. At home, she found Michael helping Ethan with homework at the dining table. The lamp cast a warm circle of light over their heads. She stood there for a moment, watching, listening to their quiet conversation about fractions and fairness. She felt a deep gratitude for her husband, for his steady kindness, for his refusal to let ambition erase compassion. Later that night, as they lay in bed, she whispered that she wanted their marriage to remain a partnership of equals, a sanctuary, a place where success was measured by love given and received. Michael squeezed her hand. He said that true wealth is seeing your child sleep peacefully and knowing you were present. Months later, at the annual company gala, Charles Whitmore stood at the podium. The ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight. He spoke about growth, about profit, about vision. Then he paused. He said that the greatest achievement of the year had not been financial. It had been cultural. He invited Daniel and Alina to the stage. Applause rose like a wave. Charles said that real leadership is forged in moments of discomfort, in moments when pride is challenged, in moments when a single decision reveals the condition of the heart. Alina looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Sophia and Marisol's memory. The audience saw not a billionaire's daughter and an employee, but two human beings who had chosen growth over ego. After the gala, Charles embraced his daughter. He told her he was proud. Not for the numbers, but for the compassion. Alina felt that old tension finally dissolve. She understood that her father's fortune was never only about money. It was about legacy. About building something that outlived profit margins, something rooted in dignity. Years passed. Sophia grew into a brilliant young woman. Ethan grew alongside her, often studying together at the Whitmore kitchen table. Daniel eventually remarried a kind school teacher who adored Sophia. Their home filled again with laughter that echoed against healed walls. Alina and Michael celebrated anniversaries marked not by lavish gifts but by shared gratitude. The company flourished. But more importantly, families flourished. And every time Alina walked past the office window where she once fired a devoted father for one day of love, she paused. She felt again that sharp moment of shock. The cold air, the sound of her own unforgiving voice. She let the memory humble her. She let it remind her that authority is a privilege. That work is sacred, but family is holy. And she continued building a life and a company where no parent would ever again have to choose between a paycheck and a child waiting in the front row, scanning the crowd with hopeful eyes, searching for the one face that means home. And that commitment began to ripple far beyond the walls of Whitmore Holdings. Other companies started asking questions. How had productivity increased after expanding family leave? How had profits grown while ours became more humane? Alina began receiving invitations to speak. Boardrooms in Chicago, conferences in San Francisco, leadership forums in Boston. She stood beneath bright stage lights. She told the story plainly. She spoke about the day she fired a loyal single father for one day off in 9 years. She described the smell of polished marble, the cold weight of authority in her voice, the echo of her own footsteps as he walked away, and then she described the restaurant, the golden light, the sound of silverware. The shock of seeing him seated across from her billionaire father. Audiences held their breath. She told them that leadership without empathy is failure dressed in success. She told them that policies must serve people, not the other way around. After each speech, parents approached her, some with tears, some with quiet gratitude. One man said he had missed his daughter's final basketball game because he feared losing his job. A woman confessed she had hidden her pregnancy for months out of fear of being replaced. Alina listened to each story as if it were sacred, because now she understood that it was. Back at the company, Daniel had grown into a senior director role, not because of pity, but because of skill. Because of loyalty, because of the steady integrity that had defined him long before Alina learned humility. Sophia entered high school. Her science projects became more complex. Her dreams stretched further. One evening, she asked Alina if she could intern at Whitmore Holdings during the summer. Alina smiled. She said yes. On Sophia's first day, Alina walked her through the same marble lobby. The scent of polished stone still lingered. The sunlight still streamed through towering windows, but the energy had changed. There were photographs on the walls now, employees with their families, children at company picnics, scholarship recipients smiling with diplomas in hand. Sophia paused in front of a framed drawing. It was her childhood sketch of the tall building with smiling stick figures in every window. Alina had kept it, protected it, honored it. Sophia laughed softly. She said she had drawn that picture after watching her father cry in relief the night he was rehired. Alina felt her chest tighten. She realized that even quiet tears leave lasting impressions on children. That evening, Daniel and his wife hosted dinner. Michael and Ethan joined. The table was crowded with plates of roasted chicken, rice, and warm bread. Conversation flowed easily. At one point, Daniel raised his glass. He said that hardship had carved strength into his life. But compassion had filled the cracks. He looked at Alina. He thanked her again, not for correcting a mistake, but for allowing the mistake to transform her. Charles Whitmore grew older. His steps became slower, his voice softer. One afternoon, he asked Alina to walk with him through Central Park. The trees rustled in a gentle breeze. Children ran across the grass with kites. He spoke about legacy. He said that buildings crumble, markets shift, fortunes rise and fall, but the way you treat people becomes your true inheritance. He stopped near a bench. He looked at her with the same steady gaze he had worn in that restaurant years ago. He said he had arranged that dinner on purpose. He had known about Daniel's request. He had watched to see what kind of leader his daughter would choose to be. Alina felt a familiar sting of discomfort, but it no longer frightened her. It grounded her. She thanked him for the lesson. For the discomfort, for the truth. As seasons turned, Whitmore Holdings launched a foundation dedicated to supporting widowed parents and working families. Scholarships were funded. Child care centers were built near company campuses. Counseling services were offered without stigma. Daniel often spoke at foundation events. He told his story with quiet strength. He described the fear of standing in Alina's office that morning, the ache of thinking he had failed his daughter, the shock of being invited to dinner by a billionaire who saw his humanity. Each time he spoke, the room fell silent, not from tension, but from recognition, because every heart in that room had known some version of sacrifice, some version of love under pressure. Years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Sophia graduated from college with honors in engineering. The ceremony took place on a wide lawn under a clear blue sky. Rows of white chairs stretched toward a decorated stage. Daniel sat in the front row once again. Beside him sat his wife. Beside them sat Alina, Michael, and Ethan. When Sophia's name was called, she crossed the stage with confidence that had been nurtured by sacrifice and supported by compassion. Daniel stood. He clapped with the same intensity he had shown at her first awards ceremony years ago. Alina felt tears slip down her cheeks. not from regret, but from gratitude. She realized that one painful decision had opened the door to a lifetime of wiser ones. That discomfort can be a teacher. That humility can become a foundation. As the crowd dispersed and families embraced, Sophia ran toward her father. He lifted her into his arms as if she were still a little girl with braided hair and hopeful eyes. Elena watched the reunion. The sunlight warmed her face. The air carried the scent of fresh grass and possibility. And she silently promised that as long as she had influence, as long as she had breath, she would continue shaping workplaces, marriages, friendships, and communities where love was never treated as weakness, where parents were honored for their devotion, and where no child would ever have to wonder whether they mattered more than a meeting on a calendar. Because the true measure of success would always be found in the strength of families standing together, unwavering, resilient, and deeply loved. And that promise began guiding her next decision. And the one after that, and the countless choices still waiting ahead. Years later, when people asked Elena what had been the turning point of her career, she never mentioned a merger. She never mentioned a record profit. She spoke about a single request for one day off. She spoke about the sound of her own voice when it lacked compassion. And she spoke about the dinner table where truth sat brighter than crystal chandeliers. By then, Charles Whitmore had passed on his responsibilities and much of his fortune to foundations that served families. His portrait hung in the headquarters lobby, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of wisdom. Daniel continued to lead with quiet integrity. His team trusted him, not because he demanded loyalty, but because he gave it first. At home, Elena and Michael grew older together. They held hands on evening walks. They celebrated small victories. They listened more than they spoke. Their son Ethan once asked his mother what success truly meant. Elena paused. She looked at her husband. She remembered the marble floors, the restaurant lights, the trembling in her chest. Then she answered with calm certainty. Success is when the people you love feel seen. Success is when your work never steals your humanity. Success is when a child can look into a crowded room and always find you there. On the anniversary of that long-ago mistake, Whitmore Holdings held its annual Family Day. Children ran through the courtyard with balloons. Music played. Laughter filled the air. Employees introduced spouses, parents, and grandparents to one another. Elena stood on the small stage and looked out at the crowd. She saw Daniel beside Sophia, now an accomplished engineer. She saw young parents balancing toddlers on their hips. She saw couples who had weathered illness, layoffs, and long nights yet still stood together. Her voice carried gently across the gathering. She said that policies matter, profits matter. Discipline matters, but love matters more. She said that every workplace is built by human hands and human hearts. She said that leadership is not proven in moments of control, but in moments of understanding. The crowd grew quiet. A warm breeze moved through the trees. Elena felt no shame now. Only gratitude for the lesson that had once shaken her. Because sometimes the most painful mistake becomes the doorway to wisdom. Sometimes discomfort becomes the teacher that reshapes a life. And sometimes one single day off becomes the reason an entire company learns to honor family. This real story reminds us that ambition without compassion leaves an empty legacy. That marriage thrives on tenderness and shared burdens. That children remember presence more than presents. That the strongest leaders are those brave enough to admit when they are wrong. And that true wealth is not counted in dollars, but in the number of lives you uplift along the way. If there is a moral for everyone, it is this: choose people over pride. Choose understanding over ego. Choose love over rigid rules when love is what is needed. Because in the end, the meetings will be forgotten. The titles will fade. But the moments you show up for those who depend on you will echo for generations. If this story touched your heart, do not just walk away from it. Take one lesson and live it today. Show up for your family. Choose compassion at work. Pick up the phone and tell someone they matter. If you believe love should never compete with a paycheck, stand with us. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell so you never miss another life-changing story. Like this video so more people can hear this message. Share it with a parent, a spouse, a leader, or a friend who needs this reminder. Drop a comment and tell us one moment when you chose people over pride. Let this not be just a story you watched. Let it be a decision you make, because real change begins with one action. And that action can start with you.